everyone, I'm Celine, and in this video I'll be sharing on the mode of inheritance and also the pedigree of beta thalassemia major, which is inherited by Adam in our previous PBL trigger. So let's begin. So I would like to talk about first is the definition of mode of inheritance. What do we mean by mode of inheritance? And actually, mode of inheritance is actually the manner in which a genetic trait or a DNA disorder is passed from one generation to the next. So it means that the parents will inherit this particular gene mutation to their offspring. So later on, I'll be discussing on how Adam inherited this genetic disorder, which is beta thalassemia major, from his parents. As we know that beta thalassemia major is a type of thalassemia which is caused by a genetic disorder, and actually there are 5 types of genetic disorder, which are single gene disorder, chromosome abnormalities, multifactorial disorder, acquired somatic disorder, and also mitochondrial disorder. So among these 5 types of genetic disorder, actually thalassemia is categorized as a single gene disorder. This is because a single gene disorder is caused by a DNA sequence change or a mutation on one particular gene pair, and in this single gene disorder we can often predict the inheritance pattern in the next generation. And since only a single gene mutation is involved, so this kind of disorder, for example thalassemia, can be easily tracked through the families, and also we can predict the risk of this gene disorder to occur in the later generation. So actually in the single gene disorder inheritance, there are a few inheritance patterns. For example, autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, X or Y linked dominant, and also X-linked recessive. Based on Adam's case, which he has thalassemia, it means that actually the mode of inheritance of thalassemia is autosomal recessive, no matter what type of thalassemia he has. So thalassemia, mode of inheritance is autosomal recessive. And in my later on discussion, I'll be focusing on the autosomal recessive inheritance pattern, and also I'll relate its differences from autosomal dominant to give you guys a clear picture between the difference between autosomal dominant and also autosomal recessive. So for autosomal recessive, which is the mode of inheritance of thalassemia, in autosomal recessive, both of the mother and also one normal gene on a pair of autosomal chromosomes, which means that in two genes in a pair, only one mutated gene will cause that individual to have the disease. And if the individual have both mutated genes, they will also be infected with that particular disease. And in this case, there are no carrier in autosomal dominant disease, which means that if the individual is heterozygous, they are not a carrier. They will be affected with the disease straightly. And in autosomal dominant, the parent with this type of disease will have a 50% of chance to pass this mutated gene and also the disorder to each of their children. So we can see in the picture down here, which if the father has the autosomal dominant disease while the mother do not have the disease, they actually produce half of the children with the disease and also half of the children being normal individual. And in this case, there are no carrier, because heterozygous individual are considered as individual affected with the disease. So the example of autosomal dominant diseases are Huntington disease, neurofibromatosis, and also Marfan syndrome. And in addition to autosomal dominant, they follow vertical transmission in the pedigree. So next, I will be discussing on the difference between horizontal transmission and also vertical transmission, which practices by both autosomal recessive or autosomal dominant. So based on our previous discussion, we know that the autosomal recessive inheritance, they actually practices horizontal gene transmission. So in this case, autosomal recessive is manifested by the skipping of generation in the horizontal transmission. What do we mean by the skipping of generation? It actually means that, for example, we have three generations, which are the first generation, the grandparents, the second generation, the parents, and the third generation are the children. So among these three generations, for example, of skipping of generation can be said that in the first generation, the grandparents are affected with the disease. They are individual in that generation, that first generation, who have the disease, for example, thalassemia. But then, in the second generation, which is in the parents' generation, there are no individual with thalassemia disease. And they can be carrier or normal individuals. But in that generation, there are no individual affected with thalassemia. So it actually means that it skipped this generation, where in this generation there are no affected individual. But however, in the third generation, which are the children, they are individuals who are affected with the disease. So it is clearly, vividly, we can see that there are skipping of generation occur in this family, where the second generation do not have the disease at all. have the disease. So this is what this sentence means in the horizontal transmission. So distinctly for vertical transmission, vertical gene transmission is categorized as autosomal dominant. Autosomal dominant practices vertical transmission of gene in pedigree. So the vertical transmission is when the family has affected individual in every generation, where there are no skipping of generation occur in the pedigree of this family. So you can see back this picture here for the autosomal dominant case, where 50% of the child is having the condition and 50% of the child is being normal in this condition. So it means that autosomal dominant disorder will surely affect the offspring by 50%. So we can assume that this will cause the non-skipping of generation in autosomal dominant. So these are the difference between horizontal transmission and also vertical transmission. And next, I'll be discussing on the possible condition for the mode of inheritance of Adam parents, which we know that Adam have beta thalassemia major. In autosomal recessive inheritance of thalassemia, the first possible condition is where both of Adam parents are carriers for thalassemia. And it means that both of the parents of Adam carry the same recessive gene mutation, and they are both heterozygous carrier in this condition. Where you can see in this diagram here, for both the parents being carrier for thalassemia, they produce offspring with 20% of being a normal individual, 50% of being a carrier, and also another 25% of being an affected individual with thalassemia. So we can see here, actually the individual who are affected with the disease are beta thalassemia major, which is the case of Adam. Adam has beta thalassemia major. So why is it so? This is because the beta thalassemia major is actually meaning that that particular person inherit both mutated gene from both of their parents, which is homologous recessive in this case, where homologous recessive will cause the individual to be affected with the disease, which is thalassemia. So distinctly, if the individual is only a carrier for this genetic disorder disease, it means that that person is a beta thalassemia minor. Because in beta thalassemia minor, it is a condition where the individual only inherit one mutated gene from one of the parents, and the other gene is normal. So it is actually the heterozygous carrier in this condition. So we can assume that affected child have beta thalassemia major and the carrier have beta thalassemia minor. So we know that Adam is affected with the disease, so he is a beta thalassemia major. And next, we'll talk a little bit about the pedigree. And actually, pedigree is the representation of a family tree, and it shows how individuals within the family are related with each other. And with a pedigree, we are able to indicate which individual have a particular trait or a genetic disorder. And to get an accurate prediction, actually we have to include at least 3 generations in the pedigree. And by using the pedigree, we are able to determine how a particular trait is inherited, and we can also predict the chance that individual will have the trait themselves, or the possibility of that individual to pass this disorder to the children. So next, this is the pedigree for the first condition where both of Adam parents are carriers for thalassemia. So we can see that 1 in 4 children have thalassemia, and 1 of the 4 children are normal, and half of the child are carrier in this condition. And next, for the second possible condition is when 1 of the parents is a carrier while the other is a normal individual. And the parents who is a carrier carry 1 recessive gene in their gene pair, which they are heterozygous carrier. So in this mode of inheritance, they will produce children who are 50% normal and also 50% of being a carrier. And in this condition, there will be none children affected with this disease, for example, thalassemia. So actually, this mode of inheritance is actually not possible in the inheritance of Adam's family. Why? This is because Adam is affected with thalassemia and affected by thalassemia. There will be no normal children and no carrier of thalassemia in the children. So it means that no matter how many child these parents have, they will be all affected with thalassemia. And this is the pedigree for this condition. As we can see, all the child are having thalassemia. And this might also be a possibility to be the mode of inheritance of Adam's parents. So in conclusion, we can conclude that first, Adam have beta thalassemia major is because he is affected by thalassemia and he is not a carrier. So it means that Adam is a homologous recessive. He carries homologous recessive gene. And secondly, we can conclude that Adam's parents might be both of the parents being carrier of thalassemia, which they are heterozygous carrier, or either one of the parents is a carrier while the other parent is affected with thalassemia, who are homologous recessive. And there also one more possibility, which both of Adam's parents are affected with thalassemia. So we can see it is very important for the family to consult a genetic counselor and also a hematologist in order for them to understand their own condition and also the mode of inheritance of the parents. It is important so that they can predict the possible gene trait of their future child if they're planning to have more children. So this is all from my sharing, and I hope that you guys can understand. And if you don't understand, you can actually ask me and I'll try my best to answer your questions. So that's all from me. Thank you everyone.